Hello everybody, welcome to Global Cajon. In this chapter we are going to talk about advanced techniques to get very good sounds out of the cajon. Enjoy it! It's frequent to hear that groove is all about tempo. But I think that groove is even more about sound than about tempo. A bass sound like this is the most powerful bass sound if you hear it next to something soft and light like this. Contrary to what many people still think, the feeling of groove does not come from the power of the notes, but from the relationship between them. It does not have more groove boom boom cha cha boom boom cha that cha cha being the same pattern. In fact, probably you agree with me that the second is more groovy, since the relationship between the bass and the backbeat is more balanced. A nice way to visualize this concept is thinking in planets or galaxies versus atoms. This is the universe versus the microscopic world. The harmony and beauty that we see in a picture of planets around the sun is very similar to the one we perceive when we see a drawing of some electrons around the nuclei. The perception of groove is similar to the perception of beauty. It's not about size, it's about proportions. So we could say that the perception of groove comes, as with galaxies or atoms, from the balance between its elements more than from the size of them. In cajon, you can't get a much deeper bass sound than this, even if you play very hard. On the contrary, high notes can be played much stronger, with a very good dynamic response. This brings us a problem. If you play cajon too hard, the bass notes won't grow as much as the high notes, losing that balance and paradoxically losing the feeling of groove when you play harder. That's why it's very interesting to find ways of eventually making the high notes small, or in other words, making the bass sound big. We have talked about the most common bass and high notes and how to play them. But there are other sound considerations that are very important to make this small range instrument into a very expressive tool. An alternative bass note can be found playing with your fingers instead of with your palm. This is very useful when you need to play fast or very close to each other bass notes. The regular bass stroke starts in your shoulder and uses all the arm weight, giving that great and heavy bass sound. But if you need two or more consequent bass notes, that technique won't really work, because you need a faster machinery than the shoulder to make that happen. That's when the wrist technique comes in. The arm works as a toe. For big heavy stuff, it moves from its biggest articulations, which are shoulder and sometimes the elbow. But when it comes to more precise moves, it works better with its final articulated points, which are wrists and fingers. In this exercise, we're going to practice how to achieve nice bass notes, but only playing with our wrists. So let's put the wrist attached to the head and let's practice like this. Of course, you don't play music like that. It's only a practicing mode. But it's good to, practice your muscle memory. So when you are thinking on music, your hands work properly, okay? So let's attach the wrist to the head and let's go. This technique is actually very useful because when you want to play several bass notes with the same hand, you can't really use your arm technique. You need to use the wrist. So actually having been studying like this, actually really helps to do things like this. Right? Because you already have your wrist. I'm not using my arm at all. Okay? In your practice routine, make sure you really move your wrist instead of playing so much with your shoulder and elbows. That's going to give you a big control of sound and dynamics on the cajon. Although I never use it on a pattern, it's good to know that the cajon has a subwoofer bass note that is kind of in the center or even lower in the head. It's not as rounded and nice as the regular bass note, but it's this subwoofer there. So maybe for some effect you wanna use it. So you have the regular bass. think there, okay? You can play a little bit with the tension of the head using your foot. Again, I don't use these things on a pattern, but for a solo or for some effect, it can be interesting. Take a look. Besides the most common high note stroke, there is another one that I use a lot. This is the slap stroke. The big difference with a normal high stroke is that the pressure is made with the tips of your fingers instead of with your whole hand. Make sure you use all of them. Okay, I'm going to give you another example of the slap sound on the cajon, okay? So we see the difference between that one and the regular high note. The regular high note is like this. Okay. The slap. That's slap. Okay. You want to get a good slap with both hands. Okay? So again. I use this stroke when I want to make a especially distinguishable high note. For example, when simulating a drum set and playing the snare part. This example, we are going to play a paradiddle, doing bass, slap, bass, bass, slap, bass, slap, slap. Okay? Bass, slap, bass, bass, slap, bass, slap, slap. Okay? With the same hand. So it would be. And now with the left hand. There is also a slightly different slap if you put one hand on the head, like muting the head, and then doing the slap with the other hand. It's different. See, the head is tighter, so it sounds even higher. So this is the regular slap, and that's the, so for a solo, okay, same here. It's like tighter. Depending on the cajon, a slightly different and sweet slap note can be made, hitting on the upper center area of the head. The cajon has a lack of melody options, which at the same time is part of its beauty. But sometimes, for expressive reasons, you would wish to have more melodic notes. Playing on the side of the cajon will give you some extra colors in your palette. I use them when soloing, or I incorporate them on grooves. Knocking on your cajon will give you a drier and shorter sound than with your open hand. For me, this stroke is not that interesting by itself, sound-wise, but there is a great thing about it. It sounds less and with a slightly different color than regular open-handed ghost note, which is great to enhance other notes without having to play really soft ghost notes between accents. It also cleans the pattern up if for musical reasons you don't want many ghost notes. And it has another great input. You don't need to raise your hand or move your arm to get a high note. You just close your hand.
La luna me coge de la mano, compara tu amor con el universo y me dice al oído, vete a buscarla que te está queriendo, que sueña contigo y te cubre a beso y te come a beso. Ya caramelo de menta y limón, ya caramelo de menta
I use nails mostly in three situations. One is the flamenco guitar technique. What I'm doing here is a 7-stroke roll. 4 with my 4 fingers, 2 in this hand, and then the 1. So it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Look. Right? The second is when playing some specific bulería patterns. The third is when playing the upbeats of 16th note on my left hand. It makes a very thin and clear ghost note. You can get interesting sounds combining these techniques. For example, playing bulería, I usually play bass, then knuckle, then nail, like this. So bass, knuckle, nail, bass, knuckle, nail. A very fun exercise to work on our capacities to take the best sounds out of the cajon and all the possibilities sound-wise that the cajon gives us is to make improvisations or design grooves that have those different techniques and have fun with it. In this chapter, we learned that the cajon lacks of melodic options. So, if we want to... Joder. In this chapter, we learned that the cajon lacks of melodic options. So we have to be very creative to make the most out of it in this aspect. Creativity and technique are essential in this goal. Well, I hope you enjoyed this chapter. You can find many other chapters of Global Cajon in my YouTube channel. Also in my website or Facebook, you can see the index to check the chapter that you are interested in. Thanks for being there and see you around. Adios.